welcome to Run, Build, Grow, the podcast that laces up its running shoes and dives deep into the heartbeat of the communal spirit of running. I'm your host, Andrew Ware, the Runnin' Rev, and I'm thrilled to take you on this exhilarating journey where we explore stories that go beyond the pavement. And for this episode, I am joined by Kathy Butler, coach at Run Boulder AC. You may remember mention of her from previous guest Adam Vadabancourt, who joined us a number of episodes ago back on November the 8th. You can hop back in the podcast feed and check that one out. It's episode 42. But for this episode, I have on his coach, Kathy Butler, who comes to us with this experience of coaching, comes to us with this experience of working with athletes of all different and varying abilities, working with even the United States Association for Track and Field, and working with them on coaching education and what that looks like, diving in to this important nature of having a coach and the role that coaches can play in community. So I'm really excited for this episode as we dive into this conversation with Kathy. All right, welcome in everybody. Today I am joined by Kathy Butler. Kathy, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, getting through this winter season. Well, I guess it's not quite winter yet, but y'all already have snow out there in Colorado, so I guess I can't say much. But Kathy, it's exciting to get you on as a USATF certified coach. It's always fun to get folks who help with the educational stuff, who do a lot of that coaching education, but also having connections to folks, to someone who's been on here before, and Adam, and coaching him and doing a lot of stuff with USATF. So, as we go through this conversation, it still is important, I think, to start where we always do with what is your community and what makes your community awesome?
Well, I have a few communities. So my immediate local running community is the group that I coach, which is Run Boulder AC in Boulder, Colorado, which Adam is part of. And that is kind of my main group. There's anywhere from probably 10 to 16 in the group. And, everyone is kind of like-minded in that most people have a job, but everyone has running goals. And the main thing is that they want to enjoy being there and show up every day and work hard, but then go on and hang out or go to work or do other things in life.
And I think you probably get an interesting perspective being balancing both this coach as well as, kind of wanting to do your own thing too. And what's it been like for you to kind of form Run Boulder AC, to bring this crew together? How did it come together? What were your beginnings in being a coach? And what did that look like?
So when I was still an athlete, I was a professional athlete. I ran in college, professional athlete for 12 years. But my college coach encouraged me to get into coaching. He apparently saw something in me that he thought would make me a good coach and really encouraged me. He had me on as a volunteer coach, both at University of Wisconsin and at Stanford. And then just kind of I was still competing. He actually tried to hire me at one point, and I was like, no, I still have a couple more years of running left. And then I just kind of continued from there. I coached while I was still competing. I coached our local high school, which I just started back coaching again this year. And so I coached them for quite a few years and then took a 10-year break and back doing that. But yeah, so just kind of started that way with the college volunteer stuff and then high school. And then I was kind of coaching some people online, but wanted to increase the amount of, once I retired from competing, wanted to increase the amount of coaching I was doing. So was looking for a group. I first started with just a recreational half marathon training group in Boulder through a running store, just kind of getting people of all abilities to be able to run a half marathon, which is a lot of fun. And that kind of turned into Boulder Track Club offered me a group, sort of like the elite, but not their top group, to see if I wanted to build that. So I built that for a couple of years and then decided to go out on our own, just not really anything to do with Boulder Track Club. Just everyone was like, well, we're good enough to be our own top group rather than being the second level group within Boulder Track. So we went out on our own in 2018, I guess. And since then, just yeah, I've been building it. I mean, the most important thing for me, and part of the reason why we decided to go on our own, was that the feel of the group and everyone getting along was probably the most important thing. I have people of all abilities, but the most important thing is that people want to be there and encourage each other, and work hard, but then it's all a little bit of fun as well. So that's the main part. When people ask about joining the group, that's the first thing, is I want to get a feel for whether they'll be a good fit for the group or not.
And what was that transition like for you, going from athlete to coach? And of course, it sounds like you had some years where a lot of that overlapped, where you were still competing and yet you were coaching. But for you, what was that transition like?
I think it felt like a fairly natural transition, something that the sport gave me so much. So, and I seem to be able to relate to people in the coach athlete relationship quite well. So, and my degree was in exercise physiology. I had the sort of knowledge background. So it seemed like it just kind of grew gradually, but it also was quite an easy transition to be able to give back to the sport that gave me so much, over the years. So, and also still to be involved in the sport. I had a few years right after I had my daughter where I wasn't as coaching as many people or wasn't as involved, but I think maybe it just allowed me to continue that. I feel like I retired but I was happy with my running career, but then to still be able to be involved with the sport, it was a nice transition for me.
And I think that there's a lot for that for a lot of people who even are still finding joy in runnings, for say like your average amateur athlete, but to be able to kind of take this perspective of, what does it mean to be a coach? How have you seen in your experience in that time of being an athlete and a coach at the same time? How much does like the phrase like student of the sport really like play for you? Because that's everything that I think of. Like I love learning. I took the USATF course because I wanted to learn more about the mechanics of running, not just for myself, but to help others. How much of that for you was wanting to be a student of the sport, just loving the sport so much you wanted to learn more and more, and what information you could get?
Yeah, I mean, it's still ongoing today. I'm always learning. I was just in Florida, actually presenting and facilitating our level 3, USATF level 3 course. And I feel like I always learn something. I'm going to teach a level 1 this weekend in Houston. I will learn something from the people that are there, the coaches that ask questions. So yeah, no, I mean, there's always something to be learned, whether it's on the technical side or, I feel like especially from sort of COVID on, I really worked a lot on my kind of what they call soft skills, but they're hard skills. Like really kind of, am I communicating effectively? How well am I getting across what I mean? How well am I listening to what people are looking for from their running? Those kind of skills, like really kind of what everyone wants something different from running, like you said, like, it could be just to get outside and, clear their head, all the way up to competing at the Olympics. And those two could also be the same.
Yeah.
The Olympian might just get outside to clear their head too, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've always wanted to keep learning, and I'm always reading like studies and like research. And I think if I hadn't been a professional athlete, I probably would have gone into some form of physiology research. So this is my version of that. I let the other people do the research, and then I try to apply it to the rest of things,
Well, I think that's so great. And to even continue to follow that a little bit of what does that mean for your coaching experience? I know in my experiences, I've had coaches who have encouraged that sense in their runners, right? They're coaches, they're teaching all along the way. They want their athletes to understand those nuanced aspects of the sport. What makes your body tick? And it seems like you're along those lines too, especially having talked to Adam. How important is it for you as you are coaching to also have your athletes somewhat be students of the sport as well?
I think probably the most important thing about that is that everybody wants something different. Like Adam, in your podcast, he talked a lot about how he lets me just take care of some pieces of his, running. He enjoyed being able to let go of the sort of statistics and analysis. But to the same extent, I would love it when people ask me the why. And not everybody wants that kind of level. Some people just want to show up. I have one athlete who she gets her training on the platform like way ahead. She always waits till the day of, the morning of, to look at the training. She never looks ahead. She just shows up. And there's something to be said for that as well, if that's what you want from your running. But to the same extent, anytime anyone wants to know why or how we're going to plan things and why we plan things a certain way, I think it's amazing, first of all, that they want to know. But I love being able to kind of go through that process of sharing the sort of the reasoning behind what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, when I'm helping friends or folks in my run club, not even close to being elite, any of us at all, I think a lot of times it helps to understand even why your body behaves a certain way. I know that when I'm thinking about what I'm doing on the run, it's really being intentional of how my body's moving, of what it's doing, and knowing that the nuances that I bring, how those fit in, say with the more mechanical stuff that goes into the sport. How does that translate then from something like Run Boulder AC, USATF, USOPC, all those things. How do you see stuff like that being able to translate to everyday runners who are out in the world? And we're trying to hit big goals and big PRs, and we're also not competing at like the top level. What does that mean for folks in that tier?
I think there's so many different ways to look at it, but there's different elements people are always working on. But in some ways, when you're either a novice runner or someone who doesn't have as much time to put into it, to me, it's almost even more important what you do with that small amount of time you have. And I always think the basics are just so critical. Good drills, good, not just running everything at one pace. All those kind of things that really help someone not only achieve their own running goals, but also to stay healthier and be able to run for longer. I have a woman right now, she's in her 60s and she's trying to do a marathon in every state. And she's getting there. I think she's at like about 40. Like she doesn't have that far to go. But for her, it's been a big part of it is staying healthy, being able to kind of get several marathons in, like 4 or 5 marathons in a year. So that's a very different perspective, but we still do, the basic things like hills for good form and, drills and all those kind of things, pickups, all that stuff. Still really, it might matter, maybe not more, but just as much for that person. And you're developing with high school kids, you see it. They're very much like not only are they going through puberty and growing and all that stuff, but then you're trying to develop that coordination and those skills with them. And, the same sort of thing, like learning how to pace and learning how to get the most out of themselves. That's a big part of anyone's running, but for them, it's just as much. So all those beginning skills are really important. But they're important all the way through. So I don't think it's that much different. Obviously, it's a lot less volume, but the important pieces still need as much focus for everybody,
Yeah. And while a lot of it is recognizing where you are in the midst of all of that, I often think of how vital even that knowledge and understanding can be within the sport itself. When you see folks lining up at a starting line for a race and maybe they haven't stretched or something, how are we caring for ourselves, especially when you're in the midst of injury cycles and, how do you break the cycle? How do you do this? How do you do that? What does it look like to have good form? I think at the end of the day, a lot of folks, they may not want to go faster, but they may want to get the most out of themselves. And I wonder what you would say to folks as, they might be considering what might run coaching look like? What might it be? What might it mean for, anybody to have a running coach, no matter what level of the sport you're on? Because this is something that I look at is like, man, how can my running benefit from a coach?
No, for sure. I think one big piece that a lot of people come to me for is accountability. So, they love to run no matter how, dedicated, how motivated you are as a runner, there's always days when you don't want to get out the door. That's just across the board. but you also know deep down inside that it will make all the other days easier if you're supposed to go out. I'm not saying you should take rest days. I'm not saying you don't take rest days, but having that, and for some people it's accountability on the little things. So for some people it'll be, getting those drills in or learning how to do drills. Maybe they've just never done anything like that before. I mean, I have people who've come to me for coaching who this is their first entry into sport of any kind since maybe like middle school or at all. Like they'll be like, well, I played like t-ball, like that'll be their sporting background. And so, just getting their body to move in an efficient way is really important for them. So they're going to get that out of coaching. And then so some motivation type factors, just that kind of knowledge of what it takes, not just the sort of physiological systems, but that you have to gradually build things up. Maybe they need some cross training because their body can't handle as much running as they're motivated to do, just fitting all that stuff in. It's one of the big pieces, especially maybe somebody who's never had a coach before. Those are the things they're going to get out of that. But then, just anyone will get extra motivation. I've had, athletes that compete on the world level who would much prefer to have me there to work out than to do the workout on their own. And, there's even research studies, here we go with the research, that show that, just having somebody else there makes a big difference in terms of the speed that you run at, or, the effort that maybe it feels a little easier because somebody's there. So all those kind of things. I mean, obviously sometimes you have long distance coaching too, but just communicating as much as possible so that people can benefit from, not only, it's sometimes you have to change things regularly, but so, kind of communicating and just being able to adjust things. There's all this talk about how AI is going to take over coaching.
Yeah.
And there's just no way, because there's that human piece is not there. There's not somebody to come to and say like, well, I had kind of a bad day. I mean, you could say this to AI, but it's not there yet. That's for sure in terms of responding. But like, oh, I just don't feel that great. And for the human coach to make the decision, well, okay, you're overloaded. You actually need a rest day. Or for them to say, oh, why don't you just get out and see how you feel? Warm up, get into it. And then they end up having a really good day and it turns their day around. And so those kind of pieces, I think, are the things you get out of like a coach that you wouldn't get from just going out and training on your own.
And how much of your coaching also focuses on that the mental side? I mean, you kind of incited to it a little bit, but I feel like coaches, especially in what I kind of term as this new generation of runners that's kind of been born since 2020, since the pandemic, and we've seen this boom, right? It's people who are both trying to, accomplish things, PRs, PBs, we don't need to go into the discussion on that one, but, accomplish time-based goals, even distance-based goals. But I think that there's also, that mental side that you kind of, mentioned earlier of, some folks go out for a run to clear their head. But I mean, there's also this insane mental side of running when it comes to even performing our best. What have you learned even in this time since the pandemic and the athletes that you've been training both before and after? What have you seen about that mental side of running as you're helping these athletes, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and in those ways?
I try to focus on the benefits of running. One thing I say to a lot of people, if they're kind of having a rough time or their maybe work is really rough or a relationship or something, I always say that running should never add stress to them. It should be either a stress reliever or, or you should keep going out and running, So that's kind of one of the main things I say to a lot of people is this run, you're tired or whatever, is this going to improve your mental feeling that day? Or is it going to make life more stressful? Because I mean, getting tired can be physically stressful, but sometimes that's what you need. You need to get out and balance it out. So, I mean, we do focus. And then when, there's those kind of basics and learning, I mean, even with high school kids, like learning to deal with day-to-day stress, because running can't be the numbing thing, like it.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will go out and they'll use running as a way to just exhaust themselves. And I try to get away from that. I try to use it as a positive. And if it's turning into a negative thing, then maybe we need to take a step back, take a few days off, reassess where we're at. But then there's also, just having like daily goals too with your running. And there's just many different aspects. There's sort of the performance aspects, and then there's the mental health aspects and all of those kind of things. So it's not any one sort of psychological approach to coaching. There's many aspects to that.
No, I think it's great because one of the things that I noticed, I took level 1 back in 2022, and there's that whole section on like coaching psychology and really understanding the mental development of runners and what that looks like. And for you, like, how much do you think there is a positivity of moving our sport in this direction, where we're looking at the mental state of runners, especially in the era of where the elites who are kind of setting the standards, it's you no longer have like the Lydiards or, even Jack Daniels. You're defined by double thresholds or, just massive amounts of mileage, 120, 130 mile weeks. How do you balance sort of that physical with the mental when you're talking with everyday runners? Because it can be so easy for us to want to do a marathon and to see some of these marathoners train and be like, man, I want to be like that. And we may not go to the extent, but how do coaches, how can we, and then how can communities surrounding a lot of these folks help to balance a lot of those physical versus mental demands?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that everything is individual. You can't look at somebody else and compare. I always kind of say this is back before you could see everybody's Strava and all that stuff. But, they would interview athletes and they would ask to give a sample week, right? So do you think they're going to give their easy week? No. They're always going to give their absolute hardest week. And you don't know if after those 7 days, the 8th day was actually a rest day. I know one very high level athlete that's what she did. She ran 7 days and then took an 8th day as a rest day. All those kind of things. So never really, the comparison game can be, it's a hard one to get over, but really trying to get people to focus on themselves and what works for them, I think is really important in that sense. Sometimes I have people just try to not look at that stuff. Like maybe they have runs that they don't wear a watch, or, they just wear, I have quite a few people over the last few years that have bought Timex watches because, the feedback from all of that kind of technology and comparing to what other people are doing and hearing all these things like, oh yeah, double threshold, it sounds so exciting or whatever. I have probably 2, maybe 3 athletes that could handle the occasional double threshold day. It's, and some of that is by handle, have the maturity to not run it too hard, understand what threshold actually is for them, be able to recover in between, not have to go and work a job where they're on their feet and lifting things all day in between. You can't do double threshold if, you're doing a manual job all day. It's just not possible. Even if you're standing on your feet as like a physical therapist, that's going to be pretty hard to then go and do another training session. So just kind of looking at everybody's overall load. I had one woman who ran 2:37 marathon before super shoes, so pretty good. But the most she ever ran was 55 miles a week. So it's just, you really have to look at, she was walking about 50 miles a week as a doctor, but, you have to think about everyone's individual contributions, and that's the same for their psychological approach. But I really think maybe running groups and coaches are the opportunity to get away from some of that, to get away from the comparison game and just look at, what do we get out of this? Okay, yeah, we get faster, we get fitter, we get healthier, those things. But you get that sense of community and you get to run with people, and you go and get the coffee afterwards, or, you're looking out for each other. You go to the same races, those kind of things, like I think sort of the coaching world and the running group world is sort of the balance to all of that crazy, stuff that you see about what some people are doing training wise.
Yeah. And I think it all comes back to sort of that developmental understanding of how we grow as runners. And to see that, I think what I'm beginning to notice now is that greater focus towards developing, yes, who we are as runners, but also developing as people. And I think for me, as we look at a lot of professional groups that are getting out there on Instagram and all over everywhere. I think that's one of the things that we're starting to notice is, you can look and see, and it's like, oh, look, there goes like a 5-something mile and things like that. But that bigger development as a group, as a body. And so, I want to kind of shift a little bit and talk a little bit about Run Boulder AC. You kind of gave us a little bit of the early story there because, and to really come at it and say, I think that this club system where it's a lot of people gathering together and where those clubs are able to have coaches that help them to develop, how much do you see that building the community that you have at Run Boulder AC? So, how many athletes do you have at Run Boulder AC? How many are local and how many train together? And so then what's community building look like among those athletes? Because they're also probably all training for different things, right?
Yeah, no, they are. They're all over the place, different times of year. We have about anywhere between 10 and 20 actively training for something. So usually, and then any given day at training session together, we have usually between 8 and 12. Because we have kind of two groups. We have an early morning group and then a regular, what we call the regular time group, which is still in the morning, but a little bit later. And so there's a couple different groups training together. But in terms of community, for them, it's about, just being able to show up and know that you have a friendly face there and somebody to go and warm up with and just talk about, we have this one athlete, she'll probably like this shout out, but whether she's on time or not is always determined by her teenager's ability to control his hair in the morning before he goes to school. So, she's always like, well, he couldn't get it quite right this morning. I'm going to be a few minutes late. But, all those kind of things, like everyone's just kind of accepting of life. And then everyone gets there and, they'll say, hey, go start without me. I'll catch up. And, just that they have each other and they're happy to see each other, I think first and foremost is going to make the running part so much easier. Like they're encouraging each other, whether it's the master's athlete who still wants to run cross country and track, or, the young 22-year-old who's just finished running in college. Everyone is encouraging of each other. And I think you do see that in some of the big professional groups are like that, but not all of them. I think it just depends on the group. I've definitely had people that have been in other groups and come to my group who are, looking for a little bit more of a sense of support from each other rather than competition. And I think it can easily, I'm not saying we've had times where it kind of slips in one direction or the other. But, the main focus is always on supporting each other with your running goals. It's never, you can be competitive. That's fine. You can run hard, you can race, you can all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're there to support each other, both as people, but also in your running endeavors, whatever level of those endeavors those are.
And how much of a role as a coach do you play in helping to bring them together in, whether it's having them share common workouts or even just, do you do any sort of group building or things like that? What does that look like from your perspective as a coach? You talked about when I sent you the form, growing up in a system that was kind of a group of like-minded people who are just working towards these goals. How are you as a coach building that?
Yeah. So from a purely logistical training point of view, I try to coordinate workouts as best I can so that people can still train with each other, even if, they aren't training for the same thing, or, one person might not be, might be training for a 5K, 10K, another person's training for a marathon or 50K or something like that. But I'll try and coordinate the workouts so that, they can still do portions together. If we're at the track, maybe somebody's doing 600s of the 800s, or if they're doing thousands, one person does a 600 and a 200 with a 200 break, those kind of things, just to make sure that everyone can be together as much as possible. So that's sort of the logistic side. So I'm always, sometimes if people look at their training too early, they'll be like, that workout doesn't look like it's for me. And I'll be like, oh, no, that's the workout that somebody else is doing. I just have to put it there to remind me to coordinate your workout with their workout so that, I'll adjust the recovery and the paces and the distances so that they can still run together as much as possible. Obviously, if the differences are too big, then they're not going to be training together. But having a range of athletes, everything from, Adam, we have triathlete who's probably faster than Adam, but not as good over a marathon. Those two guys, at the fast end, all the way down to, 3:15, 3:20 marathoner, everything. And that's not even slow, right? Like that's just like, but it's an hour range in terms of marathon speed. So like trying to coordinate those together and make it mesh as well as possible. So, you have kind of a range that stay together, and then you'll have another group that's within the same range, and you kind of coordinate them all so that it works. And then even outside of that, if you can't get them to be able to run together, I try to make the location work so that they're crossing paths a lot, so that, maybe we're in a place where it's a loop or like a 3K loop. We have a 3K loop, which is not a loop that we call the 3K loop, but it's a lollipop. And that particular loop allows them to see each other a lot. So even if somebody's running on their own, they're still interacting as they pass other people in the group as much as possible. That was the first part of your question, and now I don't remember what the second part was.
No, I mean, well,
group, it was group building activities. That's what it was. Now I remember. No, we do. And it's funny because I just put on we have a Slack thing for our group. And it has all kinds of things. Like there's workout is the most used one because people are coordinating, meeting up for workouts, long run. But then we have like brunch and like random things, races, all these other subjects. But I just put on yesterday, I was like, I don't think December is going to work for us to get together for sort of a holiday time period thing. So how about let's celebrate the new year together, and we'll come up with something for January. And so we do try to do, kind of team brunches or dinners or, various kind of holiday type things. Not specifically the holidays as in this time of year, but, like different times of year, 4th of July, whatever. Definite kind of get-togethers, and then less formal, coffee after training if you don't have to get to work. Those kind of things are really important, sort of as a team. So that's probably the main things. Trying to coordinate some races together so that you can travel to races together. That really helps build the team sort of community feel as well. And then just making sure that we kind of coordinate people who we don't meet each other every day. So people meeting to do other runs or, those kind of things as well, just helps to build the community of the group.
And I think it provides an avenue for others to be able to, understand what that might look like as well. Because, especially in a place like Boulder, where it is you can run, 100 yards and see, 15 professional runners. But to even say that, there are places where people can get sort of that understanding of community where they can train together. And I think when we look at the intersection of what is happening with the running boom and all of the, increasing amounts of people who are just running with the nature of community, while also holding on to this idea that, learning and growing in our sport is almost essential to continue to do it. Because I hear over and over again, it's like, if you're not learning anything, then you're going to continue. Even just the basics, you're going to continue to wear the same shoes. You're never going to upgrade them. You're going to tear your feet up. There's risks of injuries and things like that. And so at some level, there's some kind of learning that's going on. I think that when we integrate a lot of this stuff together, and it's hilarious because when I was starting to think like, oh man, I want to become a certified coach. And of course, as well as anybody, there's 100 different paths out there to become a certified coach. There's USATF, there's Roadrunners of America, there's, Jack Daniels now offers a certification. There's all this stuff. And as I'm asking people, like, no, do USATF. And, to say that the education that I experienced, for listeners, Kathy was not my teacher for this. This is actually the first time we've ever met, but I've heard her name many times because her accolades in USATF coaching education, are long. But for you, as you're developing education for coaches, what are sort of the new things that USATF, that you and some of the other folks who are helping to develop these things are looking at when it comes to not just professional, elite, sub-elite athletes, but just in anybody who is coming into the running sphere, who just wants to not just, but who wants to run for enjoyment, fun, but also wants to push themselves a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you always have sort of the sciencey background to everything. The ground, like people have to have a common knowledge, partly so that you don't do any harm to somebody, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's the sort of base level that we start at. But in terms of the things that we're kind of focused on now, it's really been over the last 4 years. It's been a pretty big shift because initially with COVID we went to everything being online, but we basically just took what already existed. This is what you took was
Yeah.
what already existed, and which was PowerPoints, and put them online and somebody talked, and it still was good, like you got information, but it didn't really use the best of both worlds in terms of what can be offered with learning online and what can be offered with in-person learning. And now that's kind of evolved so that um, the some of it is done sort of asynchronously in your own time, and you get that science learning. And then we really focus that when you either have someone in person, or if you're live on Zoom, you're really getting that kind of individual event specific knowledge. So, and kind of just really working on facilitating skills for people. So
Mm.
we updated our level 2 endurance curriculum just a couple of years ago, and it had started right as COVID started and then kind of evolved. And part of the things we really focused on was how do we facilitate coaches to interact better with their athletes? So, the very first thing we do now when they arrive in person for level 2 is we do a session where they work on their communication and coaching skills. Everyone gets up, they're not sitting, just taking notes. And, we
Mm.
have everyone in small groups trying to teach each other something. And, it's really loud and like, which is real life, right? There's a lot going on, it's chaos.
Yep.
And they're just trying to use their best coaching skills to facilitate whatever little session they're doing. So just kind of working on those kind of communication skills, I think has been a big part of not only working on having our instructors be better instructors, but then doing those kind of sessions with the coaches, still getting all the science and all the latest everything in terms of physiology and mechanics and all that stuff, but working on those sort of how do you communicate if you're a high school coach and, the kids all have phones and smartwatches and whatever. How do you get them to pay attention? How do you get them to be sort of in the moment at practice and leave all that stuff behind them when they show up? So those kind of skills have probably been some of the bigger things we've been working on. Just bringing in, the sort of experts and people that are really high up in how do they do it? What do they do to communicate with their athletes? It doesn't have to be elite athletes. It's any athlete, any person.
Mm.
Everyone comes with their different things, to work out or to whenever you talk to them as a coach, that, trying to get them to sort of leave that behind and be in the moment of running and the session that you're having together rather than worrying too much about all the other things that are going on.
Well, and I think it's important for, the running community to continue to be able to see what's happening at this level and be able to relate it. I think about, high school cross country track and field programs and the amount of, especially in our current model, the amount of those folks who then become adults, not competitive runners, but they still like to get out there and the turkey trotters, the occasional marathoners, and to always say that there's something there, and the communal translations on those as well, and how that's being built throughout the different stages of life. It's often kind of a tough thing to balance, because I remember sitting in my level 1 certification and, a lot of it, obviously, a lot of the certification is geared towards, more youth natured running, but also in a sense, it's because that's where I guess the most, cohesive unit of running is, but also being able to think for myself, translating that to different communities, right? I'm never going to be a sprints coach. I'll probably never have to teach. Although I can now teach somebody how to hammer throw. So when my kids are watching the Olympics and they watch the hammer throwers, I'm like, oh, I know the mechanics of that.
I can tell you all about angular momentum. Let's talk about that.
I can. It does make watching professional track and field definitely more interesting because you know all of those things. But even to be able to see the ways that we're able, I fast twitch and slow twitch muscles, those are things that a lot of times, if you're not really thinking about it, that's something, you learn about fast twitch muscles for sprinters, but the way that fast twitch muscles can also help you as a distance runner and things like that. So, I mean, I guess what's on the horizon for USATF, especially when it comes to not just training coaches, but training communities, because we can also see the ways that running communities around the country beginning to form, whether it is your local high school or it is your group of professional athletes or just group of athletes. I think about my own USATF certified club, Tidewater Striders out here, and the way we're organized and the way everything works out with us is, as USATF, y'all are putting your name, or USATF is putting their name on a lot of different things and in a lot of different spaces. And so what's on the horizon for helping us to understand the connections with communal sport, as well as, helping people enjoy running, continue to be on the run, but continue to learn?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because a lot of the times people see USA Track and Field as the Olympic team, right?
Yeah.
As the people at that top level. But I was just at our annual meeting this past weekend, or it was like Thursday through Sunday. And the amount of representation from the associations, from long distance running, from youth, from cross country, all of those groups, and masters track and field. I mean, we have people doing track and field that didn't start till they were 50. Those that didn't do any track and field, and they're now throwing the shot put or the hammer or the they're race walking, or they're doing all these different events, pole vault, whatever. So I have to give credit. So one of our instructors and curriculum creators, recently we've been talking through, I don't know if you've heard of ADM. So it's American Development Model, and it's like this big. It existed already. Hockey kind of pushed it first, and then it exists across all sports. And there was the government, federal government, investigated kind of sports in general in this country, and they looked at, obviously there's elite sport, but what's happening with our development of athletes and development of humans all the way through. And so we've been tasked to kind of represent that at USA Track and Field. How are we going to kind of show that there's all these different levels of track and field, all these different areas, distance running, whatever it is. And Matt Lydham, who is the guy I was just mentioning, he lives in that youth world, and he was working through thinking about it, and he had this aha moment. He's like, I know what we're going to say. We're going to call it USA Track and Field for life. And that's his big thing. And he wrote it down, and then we were talking about it, and I said it back to him for the first time. He's like, that does sound good, doesn't it? Because it's not about any one particular place in the sport. It's about, all the different possibilities, whether you're a 9-year-old just beginning, going down to the track and learning how to long jump or whatever it is, all the way up to, anybody who participates, whether it's your club, going and being part of some little circuit and trying to be the club champions in your state within USA Track and Field, and all those different aspects are, I think that is the elite athlete, the elite level of the sport. That's always going to be there. That's supported by, the Olympic Committee, and those are people that have professional contracts and they belong to those big groups and whatever. But the majority in terms of the people in the sport is for everybody. It's, so just really kind of showing people that there's a place for them anywhere in the sport. We don't have the Hockey Beer League, but we do have a really robust and great Masters Track and Field and Masters LDR. You can go and run a 5K cross country race at any age and be part of a team, and or you can go and run a road race or any of those things. So I think that's probably, in terms of the general future, I think that is probably where the biggest push will be. Obviously people will still always put lots of attention and time and effort into those elite athletes because they need it. But the ground backing of the sport, I think, is where future energy needs to continue to be spent.
Well, and to say that, there's a balance for both, right? I think that there's a desire nationally for us to continue to be able to compete on the international level. Whether everyday runners want to admit it or not, there is USATF at the end of the day is going to want to, send athletes to the Olympics, to, worlds, to whatever this new one is that's happening.
Championship or whatever.
Yeah, they want to send athletes there, and they want them to come home with some hardware. And I think that, like you're saying, there is a push to say, okay, yeah, like we can focus on the top, and, this is a whole network of everything. And how do we build out this network so that it's not just, this one exclusive group of people, but so that it does feel like everybody is involved. And to say, like, I've been noted, like your coaches have been noticing. I can't tell you how many things I've done through just random things on USATF, learning about especially youth running, with some youth running that I've been doing, and even just club running and what that looks like, and race directing and getting things, all these things, just everything I think the sport is at its greatest when we can balance both of those together, because, we don't want to get rid of the great professional athletes. We like the Noah Lyles, the Sha'Carri Richardson, the Grant Fishers, those folks are what make the sport enjoyable. It's what gets us pumped up. And I want to be pumped up and feel like I'm supported too. So continuing to hold and balance both of those, I think that becomes the important part. And I think that becomes the role of sort of these, folks all across the country who either are, they are the presidents of their run clubs, they are the certified coaches, they're taking the trainings. I know tons of officials who live in my area and who will go and, they probably will work the NCAA nationals here in Virginia Beach in a couple of months or a month or so, so how this network can help us all grow.
Those officials.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We have one who helps coach with us, and man, the story she tells me, I tell her all the time. I'm like, not that you are amazing at your job, but you are why I don't want to be an official. Because it's so easy, right? You get in the USATF system, and then you take a couple of extra trainings, and I'm like, I don't want that responsibility. I want to be the person that makes you angry.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. What they do is kind of, because they're either, if nobody has any problem with them, they're kind of just in the background. Yeah. But then, when there's a problem, it's like everybody's mad at them. So it's like, doing all that stuff is a tough job for sure. Yeah. But necessary.
It is. Well, and for USATF to kind of see the necessity of folks at every different level, because there are officials at masters meets, at local meets like that. Like, there are folks who are there who are supporting the journey of every single runner that shows up. I even think about when I was in high school, and there are people there supporting that first, when I ran the 2 miles, supporting that first 2 miler that comes in all the way to that last one, and ensuring that, the track is a safe environment. I remember them getting on runners who were running across the track while we were running the 2 mile and almost getting in our way and everything like that. So again, like, keeping that safety top of mind. What does it mean to protect, to be aware of, to be cognizant, and protecting all of these different athletes who want to enjoy the sport of running, which is literally just one foot in front of the other at whatever speed or pace you can go. Man, this is great. I could nerd out about this all day.
Yeah, we've hosted just local middle school races at the high school here, and just the number of people it takes to do that. You have to have a parent or a whoever at every little turn, because a middle schooler will find some random little trail to take and claim that was obviously the most obvious path for the cross country race. It was the trail that was made by a deer. Of course it was. So you have to have 1 million volunteers, and it takes a lot. It doesn't just take the top end of the sport. But to be fair, you said something before that reminded me. Those elite athletes, they often feel like they want to be connected to the rest of the sport too. They don't necessarily want to exist in one bubble at the top of the sport. They either still feel like they either still have a club, or they have, their friends from high school or college, or, they don't exist isolated in their little elite world. They still are part of the overall sport too. And a lot of them, if asked, are happy to come and talk to people or go for a run, or, those kind of things. They often, I think people think, well, I can't ask them. And sure, there's times when they're too busy and they're traveling and they're, in their peak training, but often they're happy to be part of the other, the youth or the other aspects of the sport as well.
Yeah. And man, how often that can get forgotten. Even just, thinking about, Hampton Roads is a hotbed for a lot of professional athletes. We've produced a lot of them in track and field, and, thinking how willing they are to come back and be a part of that journey. For me, I hope it continues, because that's when I think this sport is at its best, is when we recognize both the simplistic nature of the sport, but also like the magnitude that the sport can bring. And that it's all just reconnected and interconnected and all of that.
There you go. For sure.
But yeah, this is great. So let's hit these end of podcast questions. What is your favorite distance to run?
To race?
Or just run? I like to leave it open, because sometimes people just enjoy running a good 4 mile. I don't,
I guess my favorite distance I used to like to race when I was competing was probably the 3K.
Okay.
2 mile, 3K. I didn't run 2 mile, but yeah. It's a little bit of a mixture of, having to go really fast, but having to have some pace control as well. So that was my favorite distance to race.
All right. Well, what's your favorite distance to coach?
I do like the challenge of sort of those middle to longer distance track races. But also recognize that, post-collegiately, there's not a lot of people running, 3Ks, 5Ks on the track. So probably outside of that, then it would probably be the marathon. Yeah. There's just so much to it that, whether it's just like your first time trying to get through without having to walk, or, or if you're trying to run it fast, there's just a lot that goes into it. So I enjoy marathon.
What is your favorite post-run food, snack, meal? Like if you go out for a jog or something like that, or wrap up a session or something, what are you going to grab to eat?
If it's just like a lighter run, then it's, just like a kind of regular run, then probably some form of second breakfast is involved, because there was a first breakfast before you ran, and then there's the second breakfast. So some kind of eggs or bagel or something with a coffee, that kind of thing. Probably something along those lines. If it was a hard, long race or like a big adventure up into the mountains, then we're probably looking at a burger and fries and a Coke.
Nice. And lastly, Kathy, can you give our listeners to join their local run club?
Well, I think the main reason would be to have a community of runners. Join your club so that you have that, you're going to make friends, but also you just have those friendly faces to show up and run with every day.
What an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining, Kathy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. So I know I'm interviewing a lot of coaches lately. Last week I had on Jess. This week I have on Kathy. Even next week's episode is going to feature a coach. But I think this is such a great perspective that we as the run community can begin to draw from, can begin to pull from. These are people who are at the forefront of creating community. They're the ones who are bringing athletes together. They're the ones who are doing this work of what it means to foster relationships with one another. I think that that's something that we as a running community can continue to learn, continue to grow. And I think this is great stuff. And I know we focus a lot on USATF and coaching. And I know I probably nerded out a little bit and some of y'all stopped paying attention. However, I think that this is such great stuff, because when we see the top of the sport taking care of itself, I hope to see a lot of that stuff trickle down as we continue to see new communities sprout up, new communities come together, and new communities continuing to encourage folks to just do what feels right, do what feels like is the best version of themselves. And I think no matter what level of the sport you're at, if you can get into that, there is something that we can learn from this nature of not just having a coach like we talked about with Jess and even with Kathy, but also for your coaches to be knowledgeable, to understand how to individualize training, how to make things work, how to keep you safe, how to make sure that you're protected, all of these things, how to have conversations with you. So I really appreciated this conversation with Kathy. I want to thank you for hanging out with me here on Run, Build, Grow. If you have a great story, I'd love to hear it. Email me at andrew@runandrev.com and we can get you booked for a podcast recording. And don't forget, connect with me on Instagram, Blue Sky, Strava, Substack. You'll find those links in the show notes. I publish and put content all over those places. You know, if today's episode gave you a spark, don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, or head over to runbuildgrow.com to catch every podcast. You can go back and listen to the catalog. And even if you subscribe, have future episodes just automatically pop up in your feed. Got an extra minute? Jump on to Apple Podcasts, leave a quick rating or review. If you're on Spotify, drop a rating and a comment on this episode and other episodes you listen to. You know, it's a simple way to help others discover the show and even let me know what's resonating with you. And here's the deal. If you leave a review, I'll give you a shout out right here in the next episode. Want to go the extra mile? Support the podcast and keep it growing strong by heading to buymeacoffee.com/runandrev. Whether it's a one-time tip because you just absolutely enjoyed this episode, or if you want to become a regular supporter and a monthly member supporter of this podcast, every contribution helps this community grow on and off the run. Thanks for being here and for being part of this journey. Until next time, go crush it out there. And as always, make every mile count.